Hello, Star Wars fans. Welcome back to another episode of Stories by Darksaber Light. I'm Jessica, and I'm here tonight with Arica Jade. Arica, say hi.
Hello.
And tonight we also have our promised guest, Meg Dowell, who is joining us to react to the latest episode of the Book of Boba Fett. But it's been so long since this podcast has been up, and also since we've talked with her, that really I've just kind of opened the floor up to if there's anything that we want to talk about. That's what this time is for. So Meg, thank you so much for coming back to be a part of this podcast again. And why don't you just give us an overview of what you've been up to for the last year?
Yeah, it's been a long time, and I'm so glad to be back. I'm so glad to be back podcasting in general. It's been a while, but yeah, it's been a year. It's been quite a year for Star Wars. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of work as usual with Youtini. With the High Republic. Yeah, the High Republic had hardly started when I was last here, which is wild to believe. But so with that kind of ramping up and closing out the current phases, waves, it's too much. With all that happening, we're just doing a lot of work behind the scenes to just make sure that everyone who is reading the books, has all the resources that they need, all the guides that they need, all of the community space they need to talk about the books in a positive way. And, anyone in this fandom who wants to read more of the books and, doesn't always know where to go, what questions to ask, that's what Youtini is for. And that's really where I've been dedicating a lot of my time. And it's great. And we're doing a lot of planning right now to bring even more fun things to the fandom. So yeah, that's what I've been doing, and it's great.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm such a big fan of your site and the kind of the reference materials that you've produced and the book lists and things like that. This franchise just has so many works across so many different mediums, and you guys really fill that need to kind of help people make sense of it all. So that's awesome. So tonight, yeah, like I said, we're just going to be kind of going through, this is the last episode. If you listen to that, we kind of build it as being a little bit more clinical. We talked about questions about Mandalorian history and culture, since I was getting quite a few questions about that on Twitter. If you have questions about that, feel free to reference that episode. Feel free to share it with others if they have questions. I received some feedback from some people who said like, oh, it's all clear now. It actually does generally make sense. And so it just reminded me that, I have 2 history degrees and I'm finally putting them to good use. Congrats, Mom. The degrees were worth something. But tonight I said that this was going to be a little bit more of a just kind of an emotional reflection. If you know either Meg or myself from Twitter, you know that we have a lot of feelings towards what is going on in Star Wars right now. And I mean, Meg, you can feel free to give your reflections on this too. I was not really expecting to be as invested in the Book of Boba Fett as other people were. I freely admit, for me, Boba Fett was always the character that if people were like, who do you think is kind of like overrated within Star Wars, he was always the one that I said. And but since this show, I mean, I've just really fallen in love with this character that they're giving us now, and really becoming invested in his story as much as the stories that we've gotten previously. So for me, that's been a lot of fun. And then this last episode, I feel like we got more Mandalorian lore than we have in any episode of The Mandalorian itself. So um, I'm just having fun. How are you feeling?
I have a lot of feelings as we've established. I almost want to say I'm like overwhelmed in the best way possible, but especially with this last episode, we got so much. Was not expecting that. First of all, wasn't expecting any Mandalorian anything right now, especially being like in between seasons of the show called The Mandalorian. Boba Fett is its own thing, and I knew that they were going to connect at some point. I think they'd established at some point that a lot of these shows were going to do some kind of crossing over, which makes sense. But for Boba Fett, just the series in general, I just love the fact that because Boba Fett is the main character, he's being allowed this room to grow and change and go from, as you said, this, like, for me, I agree, he was always a character that I just didn't care about that much. He was in books and comics, but in terms of like screen time, he had like almost none until the Clone Wars when we saw him when he was younger. I just didn't care. And then like this series just made him and gave him motivations, gave him reasons to do things we didn't expect, and kind of allowed us to understand like why he is the way that he is. And he became for me a character that I want to know what he's doing, what he's learning, where he's going. And this past episode, this chapter 5, wasn't about him at all. However, I am curious how it's going to connect, because we just got so much about Mandalorians and about, who do you need to survive? Can you survive on your own? Who do you depend on when, the group that has sustained you for your whole life just says, okay, bye, see you later. And we can get more into that. But I didn't expect to get this much of Din Djarin's story just at all right now, because I've thought they would save that for season 3. But clearly we needed some lead in into that. So this is what we got. And I don't fully understand, and I know I'm not alone in this, the placement of this episode within the Book of Boba Fett. Like, why now did we get all of this? But I'm certainly not upset about it. It did not take very long into the episode for the Darksaber to show up, and I was having a pretty rough morning, and then that happened, and everything was great after that. So
yeah, I definitely, I mean, I knew that if he was going to show up, I assumed that he was going to have it. I am just a little bit salty that we're seeing him use it before we've seen Bo-Katan do anything more than raise it above her head.
yeah.
I know that you understand.
Yes. Yeah. She has to hold it again at some point, right? Like, I just I worry so much about Din having the Darksaber, and now he has rightfully won it twice, which, I mean, good for him, but like Bo-Katan is just having not a great time right now.
And then he checked it in luggage on his commercial flight. Like, nobody's gonna tell her about that, right?
No.
She's not gonna be happy. But you mentioned kind of the placement of this episode, and Arica, I can't remember exactly how much we got into it on our previous episode, but I did like the comments that you had when we talked before about kind of comparing this to the model of the MCU. Did you want to say anything about why, like, what you think that they were thinking of with this kind of sandwiching technique?
I mean, I don't know what exactly they were thinking of, but I think it's very interesting that they'll do this thing where they'll tease somebody in like another show and then kind of introduce aspects of their storyline that obviously aren't going to be expanded upon until they have their own series or the next season of their own series. And it definitely is very MCU like, because Marvel does that all the time with introducing characters in some other sub franchise, and then whatever that gets teased there gets expanded upon in their own movie or show. I do think, and I forget if you had a comment on this or not, I do think that it does make it a little bit more difficult to watch these shows in isolation, because it's starting to become like required viewing of, well, if you want to understand what's going on here, you have to watch this other show, and then if you want to understand what's going on here, you have to watch this other show. And I can understand how some people may not like that. I like that kind of storytelling, so I'm fine with it, but I guess there's pros and cons to it.
I mean, you do like it because you've already watched everything you need to watch.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, we don't have to go into a discussion about this. In fact, I'm planning to have a whole episode on on talking about the High Republic, but it just strikes me that we're kind of going through the same thing. If you're reading through the High Republic series, we're basically at the end of this first phase. We've gotten 3 waves worth of content, and that's included adult novels, young adult novels, junior novels, audio dramas, comic books, and a plus marketing ploy. I have spent far more money on the High Republic than I have on Disney Plus, which allows me to watch everything else. So kudos to the marketing team. But B, this is one of those similar situations where you're really trying to weave everything together in a way that is still going to be cohesive. And it was even billed as a series that you could just read the adult novels if you wanted to. You didn't have to read everything. But Meg, I'm curious to know what you've thought with this last wave of books. For me, this is where like it really did feel like there was a place where you are missing a lot in especially the last adult novel if you are not committed to the comics and the other novels in the series. And I'm not really sure what I think about all of that. Like Arica, I really love when everything meshes together, but I also kind of feel like, is that the way that this kind of stuff should work?
I see. Okay. Don't tell anyone. And I say that as I'm on a podcast. I'm like really, really behind on the High Republic comics. So I don't know. I don't know what's going on in them. I don't do the comics thing. Other people are responsible for that. So I'm really behind. So I'm really not familiar with a lot of the characters and what's happening in the comics. So as someone who's like just keeping up with the books, I get the feeling that the way I kind of always looked at it, and maybe it's just me having this particular perspective, I don't know, but I feel like if I was reading the comics, I would be able to appreciate like certain characters and certain moments a little bit more. But I also don't feel like I'm necessarily like missing anything. Like I feel like the one thing they do, at least the way that I think about it, is they make it so if you don't read everything, you're not going to be totally lost. But they do, like Star Wars does this, it's just like everywhere. If you get it, you get like the deep cuts. And I think that's like a really fun thing to be able to understand. Like if we watch all the shows, then we kind of get when small things connect and we like those connections and it's fun. But like if you don't read the comics and there's stuff in there that's referencing that, it can sometimes feel like you're not getting all of it, but you're also not like, I don't think they're ever saying like, oh, you need to read everything, but I get like how it might feel that way. But it is great marketing to kind of say like, hey, if you want the full experience, read everything, purchase everything, please.
That's what happened with me, where I was like, okay, I'll read the adult novels and I'll read the young adult novels. And then Vernestra showed up in the second young adult novel, and I was like, okay, well, I really like this character. So then I ended up, getting the junior novel, and I was like sitting there like absolutely engrossed in this book that's made for, middle schoolers. And again, yeah, A+ marketing.
Yeah. Those books are so good though. Like if I'm being honest, the young reader books that they've put out for the High Republic are some of my favorites. Like they're just fun and fast. And maybe it's because I think like, for example, Race to Crash Point Tower, which was the younger reader one for the second wave, it came out like with or right around The Rising Storm. And so like I kind of call that book like a palate cleanser. Like I read The Rising Storm and like I felt like a broken person, and then I read Race to Crash Point Tower and I felt better.
Yeah, I'm actually I am just finishing up Race to Crash Point Tower right now. But yeah, I absolutely affirm the feeling that like you really needed a palate cleanser after Rising Storm. But yeah, I just think that it's kind of interesting both that we're kind of getting this on two sides now in this novel part of the universe, and then the all of the new TV shows that we're getting. And it's just kind of interesting to see how the franchise is being navigated now. And I mean, this is something that, you know, the first time that I really had thoughts about this topic was when I rewatched Solo, and there's Darth Maul. And it's just like, that's, I feel like fans come down, you know, pretty hard on either one side or the other on whether or not they like that moment. I mean, I'm with Arica, where I like those really deep cuts, but at the same time, when you know that you're putting such a huge reveal in a feature film, knowing that probably 80% of your audience has not watched this animated show, I don't know. That's still something that I kind of go, was that justified or not? But I mean, but that kind of actually gets us a segue to a different topic, which was Crimson Dawn. Kind of gets us back to Book of Boba Fett. Book of Boba Fett is a premise that's been teased for a long time, which is exploring kind of the crime world and this underground, and we're not getting all of the nitty-gritty, but we're getting a lot with the Hutts and seeing Boba Fett really solidify himself as a leader amongst these people. And I don't know, I don't really usually put a lot of stock in like waiting for big cameos or anything like that, but I feel like without it ever really being said, Crimson Dawn is a presence that feels like it's a part of this show, and I definitely could see them becoming a player in these last couple of episodes.
I would be surprised if they didn't incorporate it somehow, because they've been spending so much time on it in the comics, and you know, they set it up so well, you know, in Solo. And like, it doesn't have to be the main focus. They don't have to be like the quote unquote big bad, but like, why would you not at this point? Because a lot of people are gonna recognize that name, and like, it's just another way to do the fun thing of connecting everything. Or like, we don't know if we're getting more Book of Boba Fett after this, but I feel like if Crimson Dawn is something that they like reveal pretty soon, that they could spend more time on that later on if they're going to do more episodes. Maybe.
That's a really interesting question, and one that Arica and I talked about on the last episode, where I'm not really sure what to expect with these last two episodes. Before this show ever aired, I really thought, you know, it's not billed as a multi-season show. Yes, we've had this idea that everything's going to start to connect, but before the show started airing, I definitely could have seen it ending with either one or both of the main characters dying. I don't think that that's where we're headed now, especially as things are starting to piece together and there's definitely a bigger story at play. But I don't know, it's really interesting to think about what the end of this story is going to mean for the characters, because I don't really know. Does he stay on Tatooine? Does he is that his end game? Is that the end game that we're supposed to want for him? I'm not really sure, but any thoughts on where you think it's ending?
I woke up the morning that the show premiered, and I was like, Boba Fett's gonna die at the end of this. Like, I was so convinced that like part of this, the whole point of the story was like, he's sick or he's not going to heal from his injuries, and the whole thing is going to be him like grappling with everything that he's done in his life and all of these things. And then like 2 episodes ago, he was apparently fully healed, and I was like, never mind, I guess. I guess it still could happen, but that was also before like I understood how much like character work they were going to do with him, and like they've done a great job of that. So he has become a character that could live on and has dimensions, which I appreciate. I wish I knew where the rest of the show was going, and I wish I knew where he was going to end up, because right now I don't know. They've spent so much time on the flashbacks, which have been amazing, but in terms of like what's happening in the present, we just, there's not, I don't feel like there's enough to go off of to really like be able to say like, oh, I think this is where it's going to end up. I have no idea.
Yeah, I agree. This is a show that, I mean, to be honest, the premise of this show and like the structure of this show is kind of exactly what I wanted for the Kenobi show. And I'm actually a little bit disappointed that it feels like they're using it for this one, which is I really wanted Obi-Wan's story to be solely set on Tatooine, dealing with a local threat with lots and lots of flashbacks of his life. And so I'm a little bit salty because it does kind of feel like there's no connection between the two characters, but they did, for whatever reason, decide to kind of appropriate what I think would have been a logical story for the Obi-Wan Kenobi show and use it in this one. And we already know that I've always, even before this show started, I knew that I wasn't going to get what I was hoping for, since right from the beginning, Kathleen Kennedy said that this was going to be a rollicking adventure. Ewan McGregor said that they start on Tatooine and then they leave. So I knew like that was a disappointment that I'd have to get over, but it is kind of funny to watch this and go, the amount of time that's being spent on things like flashbacks and using the back to tank in order to kind of justify or facilitate those moments. I just really want to see what's in my head for the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, even if it's not what we're going to get on screen. So yeah. Arica, any thoughts that you have on the show and where it's going, how it's going to tie into anything else?
I mean, yeah, I agree that like the flashbacks seem to be the most fascinating part of it right now. And I feel like I'm not sure, again, like I don't really know where exactly they're going with this. I definitely think as a whole, it seems to be kind of like set up the show, which is sort of why I believe that there might be an additional season, because a lot of it has just been explaining how Boba Fett got to this point. And now we've set that up. So now we're going to have this big thing that's I would assume is going to go down in the next 2 episodes, but that doesn't seem like enough to fully flesh out what looks like is going to turn into a gigantic crime boss war. So it might be a situation where I don't want to spoil Loki for Meg if you haven't seen it, but it might it might be a similar situation like with Loki, where people weren't sure if it was a one-off thing or not, and then at the end of the season they revealed, oh, he's going to be back in season 2. So I could see it going that way.
I think that you're right. I mean, it says more like, if it was billed as a multi-season show, then we wouldn't have any question. But you can't really tell when they've just been marketing it as like a limited series or whatever phrase that they're using. So I think that regardless, if something is well received, it's likely that there's always going to be openings for more content if whatever people are really liking. So but I think, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this episode, because that's really what we're here to talk about. So this episode, we found out a lot about Din and his covert. We finally got the armorer back after I really thought that she was going to be in season 2 of The Mandalorian, and then was really disappointed when she wasn't. But we've seen Paz Vizsla again. And we're getting all of these new details about, well, mostly about kind of this murky period between Rebels and the Mandalorian. Stuff like this curse that has either, I don't know, I still am kind of thinking that this curse, it might be a retroactive type of thing. The clans aligned themselves with Bo-Katan in season 4 of The Mandalorian, and nobody said anything about any kind of curse. So I'm kind of like, this feels very like hindsight is 2020 to me. But we're finding out about these curses and superstitions, and lots of like literal lore, minds beneath Mandalore. The idea that there's this prophecy that the Mythosaur is going to return. I don't know. Meg, any thoughts on those big ticket items that we got in this episode?
I love the armor as a character. I always have. I think she's amazing and I wanted to see her back and we have. Part of me is like disappointed that she seems to just be very set in her ways and very set in her viewpoint of how things are, regardless of how she came to be that way. But to me, it really feels like a lot of what she's telling him is just very one-sided. Um, and it I I need him to know like that it's not all that, like what she's telling him is from her point of view how things went down and um how she feels about certain people, but it's a lot happened and stories have two sides. So
I'm very much looking forward to the day when we finally get to hear Bo's side of the story, and I really hope that she's given her due and allowed to tell the story. It is interesting. It's something I didn't really think about, but okay, yes, Din knows more now than he did in season 1 and early season 2. I found it really interesting that the armorer says you're no longer a Mandalorian. And then he goes and when he checks the Darksaber in with the droid, the droid says you can't bring weapons on the ship, and he does say I'm a Mandalorian, weapons are a part of my religion. And I mentioned this on the podcast the last time, where it's like this, it's really strange because that's both parroting what he has been raised in, but also we're seeing some independent thinking of him saying this is still my identity. And now he knows that Mandalorians don't all live the way that he's been raised to believe that they must. But it also strikes me that I'm trying to picture what happened after Luke Skywalker left with Grogu. Because I have to imagine that Din coming to ask the armorer about who she knows Bo-Katan to be, he's probably curious about what she thinks, but it sounds like he doesn't really know everything yet. So that's making me think that they must have parted ways after they left the ship. Bo would not have been happy about that, that he's got her Darksaber. But yeah, for me there's a real sense of frustration that if any of you follow me on Twitter, you probably are able to see that I get really frustrated with people who are just kind of taking what the armor has given us as straight fact. And I spent a lot of time defending Satine from people who really hate her, and now I've spent an awful lot of time defending Bo-Katan too, and now even this time having to add Sabine Wren to the list of the In Defense of Mando Ladies Coalition, because people are making comments about how it's her fault because she gave the Darksaber to Bo-Katan. And I'm just like, you gotta remember there was no problem. There was no problem in Rebel season 4. Nope. So again, that's part of the reason why I feel like this curse is retroactive. After it's easy to say something's cursed after a tragedy happens. And B, even if it was, like, I just kind of want to go, the armorer doesn't think that Bo got the Darksaber through a justified means. But I'm like, Sabine didn't either. Sabine took it from Maul while she was possessed by a Night Sister spirit. There was no intentionality here. It's just Maul left. It wasn't like there could have been a fight between Sabine and Maul. So then Sabine has this weapon. What was she supposed to do with it?
It's like I've never like mapped out like specifically like whose hands all the Darksabers been in, but also like whose hands it could have been in if we're going by this whole like who dueled who to get what. And that's one of the reasons I'm so obsessed, because I'm like, this thing has seen so much and it's not over. And yeah, the whole curse thing just really bothers me, because I'm like, it's so easy to say that that's why it happened. And I don't remember if I wrote this somewhere. I don't know. But I'm sitting there and I'm listening to her tell this story and I'm like, you're talking as if Bo-Katan destroyed Mandalore when it was the Empire did that. You know, like she had nothing to do with it. Like we don't know everything that happened, but like if you read like the Wikipedia entry about the Night of a Thousand Tears, like it really just, I know it's straight quote unquote facts, but it just makes it seem like that happened like right after Rebels season 4 when the what is that arc called?
Heroes of Mandalore.
Yes, that one. It made it seem like that happened like pretty soon after that, but I really want to know what the exact timeline of all this is, because yeah, it clearly messed up a lot of Mandalorians, judging by how the armor is looking back on things.
Let me give you what I know, which is that
Do it.
What's kind of funny is that I was speaking with somebody who edits Wikipedia, and I told them back in season 1 that the siege of Mandalore that Moff Gideon talks about is not the siege of Mandalore that matches up with the episode title, the arc that we know. And that was the problem, is that originally, like all of those changes to the Night of a Thousand Tears, that's all new, because originally it was listed as being in 19 BBY, and I was like, you don't want that. If that's the case, that means that the Republic and Bo-Katan are the ones who are mowing down Mandalorian recruits.
Yeah.
And thankfully this last episode cleared everything up. We do know though is that there's only a certain amount of time that this put down of Bo's resistance could have happened, and namely that's between Rebels and Return of the Jedi. That's only 4 ABY. So that's about 5 years between Heroes of Mandalore. I'm thinking that it's like if I had to guess, I would probably place it, Empire Strikes Back, which is kind of appropriate thematically anyway. Because the one thing that we did get, and this is again, I always have to ask myself, how much do I try to draw out of comments like this? But Paz Vizsla says that the blood of millions of our kinds are on Moff Gideon's hands. If that's the case, then Bo's resistance was millions of people. And that's hard because, again, I don't know if that's like an exaggeration, like they're just using hyperbole, but we also know that the Mandalorian Civil War before the Clone Wars also killed most of Mandalore's people. And so the idea, like these people have gone through a genocide twice in 2 generations. But all that really tells me is that there is a very finite period where that could have happened, but also that, at least from what Paz says, it wasn't a small resistance. And I do have to wonder how Paz and the armorer seem to know so much about this, that like, considering they say that they were cloistered on Concordia, they weren't even there.
Yeah.
Unless that's a lie too. I'm not really sure, but that's where we're at right about now. So
yeah, what I feel like is happening is like they're giving us all this information, but like pieces of it, and not ever like filling anything in. And I'm like, are you setting up for something? Like, are we getting more? I mean, I know we currently have a show, quote unquote, ongoing that's called The Mandalorian, but like, are we going to get like more just history? Because that's definitely one thing I'm for sure interested in, and I'm not alone here when I say that. Like, not everyone needs all of the pieces, but like I would like them.
We definitely need to see the fall of Sundari to the Empire. It's been teased multiple times. It's kind of an important part of Bo's story and the story in general. And that's one thing that I'm really hoping to see when she does get a chance to tell her story. I'm hoping that, I'd love to even see flashbacks. I thought that originally we'd see it dramatized in the Bad Batch. And I still would hope, I would love to see it in that, because I would love to see it still in animation. But we've gotten Bo making comments about, I've heard your voice 1,000 times before as she's talking about clones and I don't know, I just think that like it is an important piece of the puzzle, because like you mentioned earlier, like Bo is not the reason Mandalore fell. The Empire is the reason Mandalore fell, and that's always been a really big reason why I get frustrated with people who just don't seem to like the Kryze sisters, because Satine was targeted by basically every big baddie that we had in the Clone Wars. She was targeted directly by Pre Vizsla and the Death Watch, by Dooku, by Palpatine, and by Maul.
Yep.
She did not like she had her own ideological convictions, but there was no way to protect against that. And then Bo was also, she took Mandalore back from Maul using the help of clones, who then, it seems like, basically turned around and on the Emperor's orders took it back from her. And I'm just like, again, when you assume that not only was Mandalore basically annihilated like 30 years before that, but also that Bo is working with a very, very, very limited resistance group of her own, even back then, there's no way that she could have defended the planet against that. So I agree with you that there are a lot of pieces that are out there that we don't know all the details about. And I think that Bo is going to be a much more sympathetic character in the eyes of the fandom after we get those pieces.
Yeah, I really hope so. And like I could see, like, I don't know if it would be enough, but like kind of do what the Book of Boba Fett just did with Din Djarin and give Bo-Katan like her own episode, to give her the space to not only tell that story, but like let us go back, like let us see some of the things that happened. And I'm wondering, because now with this episode we've gotten one side of the story and we've gotten pieces of the story. Are they setting up so that we can get the other side? Maybe. I hope so. I don't know where Bo-Katan went after the end of season 2, but like I'm sure she'll be back. I hope so.
Oh, I'm sure she'll be back. I cannot imagine that she's not going to be a big part of season 3. Though I've been wrong about that before too. You know, there's you got to be careful with the speculation that you give, because I was absolutely sure that Bo would be in the Bad Batch, basically because Katie Sackhoff didn't deny it when she was asked, and then like she wasn't. So you just never know. But I definitely think that there's a story that she has to tell, and it's going to affect the whole situation. I really don't know. I don't know what the end game is for the Mandalorian. We're already well into this place where the fandom is taking sides on who they want to have the Darksaber hold the throne, which apparently doesn't exist anymore. We'll cry about that in a minute. But it's just really, it's very ambiguous right now where exactly they plan to take this story, and whether or not they'll, is Din Djarin our Mandalore and we're just going to lean right into that, or is that expectation going to be subverted? How so? It's hard to really predict anything, even as we're a couple seasons into all this content.
Yeah, and like I love that the show is called The Mandalorian and it's about a Mandalorian. I mean, I guess technically right now he's not anymore. I mean, I don't know, but
not by his cult standards.
Yeah.
They've got 2 people in that cult. They got to come down on some of those convictions.
Oh, I could talk so much about that whole thing. Oh, goodness. But I like the fact that it's called The Mandalorian. It can be about him, but it can also be about just Mandalorians as a whole, as a culture, as like you can focus on whichever ones you want to, and that just opens it up so much for like, especially having a character like Din Djarin, who was raised in a very specific way and has been shown things from a very limited perspective, and now he can like go out into the galaxy and kind of like with the mindset of like what do I not know, and kind of make those discoveries. And then there's the whole, what is Grogu going to be? Like, is he going to be like a Jedi, but also can he also still be a Mandalorian? That's a whole thing. But I like the fact that sometimes not knowing where things are going, it makes it more fun, because then you can speculate, but also with the mindset that like you're probably going to be wrong, and maybe that's not terrible.
Arica and I have talked about this extensively when it comes to, the the fact that franchises are basically set up for failure, the longer that content goes on and the more time that people spend speculating online, we all do it. It's all natural. I don't think that it would even be healthy for a franchise if it didn't kind of encourage speculation. But absolutely, like, I think that the entire fandom could use a lesson in, we all need to hold speculations very, very loosely, because if you don't, then it really is a recipe for disappointment.
Yeah.
So, Arica, any thoughts?
Not really, except to just pretty much agree. I mean, like, I love to run wild with speculation too, and I have a whole bunch of speculations, and I'm a bit spoiled because a lot of mine have kind of been sort of right. So I'm trying to be like, well, you're not gonna be right every time, so just like don't expect it. But yeah, I just, I'm trying. I think it's a struggle to sort of temper your expectations and kind of tone down the speculation, because then you set yourself up for disappointment just when something doesn't meet what you imagined it to be, and that doesn't necessarily mean the thing is bad. It's just that's not what I had in my head, and so I always kind of try to keep that in the back of my mind of like, well, if it's not the way I envisioned it, let me try to watch this as it is and judge it on the merits of what it actually is versus this doesn't track with what I had in my head.
Yeah, I think it's so fun to have theories and to kind of wake up before the Book of Boba Fett even starts and say, like, it's going to end with him dead, and that not being the case. And like, I was super wrong. That's fine. Like, I'm not mad about it. And would the story have at the time made more sense to me if that's how it would have gone? Sure. But like, the story has evolved past that. And, I don't know where the show is going because that's the theory that I had in my head. Is that a bad thing? No, like, I can be wrong. I can say, oh, I made a guess and I'm not the one who wrote the show. So of course I wouldn't know exactly how it was going to go. And like, that's how it goes. And I think sometimes you just have to like, let go and just kind of accept that, like, you're not the one telling the story. You can tell it in your head however you want it to go. But like, if it doesn't go that way, that doesn't make it, that doesn't make your story better or worse or whatever. It's just different.
Right. Right. It is still possible to be critical. I think that that's the thing, is that people get it in their heads that I think that you have the people who are kind of the, all Star Wars is good, everything's positive, we're kind of betraying ourselves and the franchise if we don't accept everything that we get just wholehearted. And then you've got the people on the other side who are just determined not to like anything, I swear. And I'm like, why do you even like this franchise?
Yep.
But there needs to be a middle ground where you criticize because you love something, but you criticize with, we've seen this so often where people get upset about something and it devolves into threats to creators, to actors, to writers, all of these things. And that's absolutely heinous and something to be totally condemned. Even when I've been on sides where it's like, I understand why you don't like what we were given, but there needs to be that middle ground where you're criticizing something because you love it, and keeping those and keeping that criticism as actual reasonable conversation about what you think should happen instead. That's always fine, especially since, like, for me, my disappointments are very rarely on whether or not this particular person made it out alive or not, so much as, oh, I feel like this theme that I thought was going to be very important ended up not being at all what the story was about. That's always hard, because that's exactly the thing that people start gravitating towards with an episodic story. We've only gotten a couple of pieces, and we all try to think of, well, what's the point? How is this going to end? And then sometimes it is hard when you get content that feels like it's going somewhere, you think it's going to be making some kind of statement or point, and it doesn't. I feel like that's I went through that a lot with I felt that with WandaVision, felt that with Falcon and Winter Soldier. And I'm not really sure what the best way to deal with that is, but I do think that fandom really needs to get kind of a swift kick in the pants when it comes to, we're all here to just love these stories. If it's going to go beyond that, then you really don't have a place to criticize.
I think a lot of it is like you love something and you want it to be better. And so your instinct is to be critical of that thing and say that I don't think this is the way it should be. The problem is sometimes that just turns into, wanting to tear people down or wanting to just be angry when like really the solution to making the thing that you love better is to kind of like be critical but be constructive and kind of say like, this is not how it should be, but here's why and here's what I think could be done better, and explaining that. And then from the other side, being willing and open to trying to understand that perspective, even if it's not the one that you share. I think it's really hard, like on Twitter, for example, to see someone's opinion that you disagree with and like really like, especially if it's just their opinion with no context. It's like it's hard to understand where they're coming from if you don't have the context you need to understand that. And so a lot of times it's like, I do it too. I see someone's opinion that I'm like, oh, that's wrong. Yeah, but an opinion can't be wrong. But when you don't see where this person is coming from, like how you can't have a discussion that way. That's why online fandom things are so hard sometimes, because unless both people are or both sides are willing to like talk it out like constructively, it's not going to go anywhere, and that usually just doesn't happen. So
And that's something that I've tried to get myself to understand. If I make a post and somebody responds, I really have to look at that post and look and say, are they open to dialogue? Are they just trying to make their opposing view known? How is it going to be taken if I, should I waste the time and the energy to construct a reply that is well thought out? And, fandom is never going to be a monolithic thing either. So you just kind of have, before we were talking about our feeds, and I think that you just try to be intentional about creating social media presences that are more positive than negative than anything, and see where it goes from there. So okay, so just as we're starting to wrap up here, we're just gonna hit right at the heart. What did you feel when you saw Sundari explode?
I was not prepared for that, and that hurt.
We finally got live action Mandalore. And at what cost?
We finally got it in live action. It's just all on fire. Everything's fine.
It hurt. It was really painful, especially because I'm not saying that we won't be able to see Mandalore and Sundari in particular in live action in the future. I definitely think that Bo's story could feature flashbacks, but seeing it go up, for me, it's like that's Satine's legacy, and so it just really hurt. And again, it wasn't even something that I wasn't expecting, because I really did, Boba says that Mandalore's been glassed, and I'm like, it was already a wasted desert. How much more worse could it be? But so when he said that, I was like, okay, if it's already a desert wasteland, then the domes aren't there anymore. So that was really hard. I look at that and I just go, this is exactly everything that Satine tried to avoid. And it's just really, I don't know, like I take it very personally, but I just really hate that. Her story was always going to be a cautionary tale of how her idealism was never going to be able to survive the Empire. But man, to see that level of violence and death and destruction that she certainly would have seen in the Mandalorian Civil War, coming to a culmination after she did create a generation of peace. It just hurt in a way that like I still haven't gotten over it.
No, it's like you see it coming, but you don't. And I kind of was just sitting there and I'm like, I feel like I know this place so well and it's gone. And like, it's almost like, because we just kind of went through this with Camino and like, it's a different feeling, but it's also kind of the same because like they make they make this place matter to you and they, give you the characters where that place that mattered to them. And then just to see the Empire just wipe it out without even thinking about it. Like it was one order and it happened. No one hesitated. It's gone. And I just, it's a lot. It's a lot. And yeah, I'm sad.
Yeah. It's hard when, I personally really like the direction of Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau. There's plenty that I could criticize them on too, but in general, I've been happy with where they've been taking stories. However, I had a friend who was basically talking about, just the fact that like we are just getting so much wanton violence. We've got not only Order 66, which we see in every media, like new piece of media that we get, we see it from a different angle. But then we've got the destruction of Camino, and in that case, nobody was on the base. So Mandalore is definitely worse for me in that regard. But it is definitely leading to this decommissioning of the clone army, and we know that that doesn't end well either. And now to add in the kind of the almost like the double, oh gosh, like I mean, Mandalore has gone through like 3 different major devastations in the last couple generations, and to see that just kind of over and over again, I get where I've got a friend who's pretty critical about what's going on, where it just kind of feels like everybody's kind of getting off on all of this violence in these episodes, and I get that, and I kind of want to, I would like to know that there's some kind of payoff, though I don't really know what that is, other than the fact that we already know that Return of the Jedi is kind of the payoff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to think about that because like we're seeing all these things happen and we know that eventually the Empire essentially pays for what they've done, but it takes so long for that to happen. And in the meantime, we see all the galaxy just suffering. And I would hope that like all these stories somehow end with finding the hope in that, and the characters finding some kind of reason to keep fighting. I mean, we've seen that happen in Star Wars stories over and over and over again, but like, hopefully we see it in The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett. And like, it almost makes me laugh when I see the criticism that like these shows aren't violent enough. And I don't want to get into that whole thing because I don't know, but you think it's not, because it really is. And
It's dark.
It is. And like I don't know what more you want. But like, hopefully with all the darkness and all this destruction, like that these characters just, find companionship and like things to stand for. And that's what I hope. Because it's emotional, and like these stories are supposed to make us feel things, but like can't all be sad feelings. Like we need to be happy too.
And George Lucas was always very clear that Star Wars is about hope. So these kinds of things, like especially with the Mandalorian story, it's hard to know where it will end, because I mean, I don't think that there's ever been a mention of Mandalore in the sequel era.
No.
So that certainly doesn't give a, I'm not saying that was purposeful. I'm not saying that it wasn't, but it's hard to know. It's also really hard to think about like where will that hope come from when they've already endured so much. What is the ending to this story that would make it really feel like this is a people who has gone through so much, and yet there is hope, yet there is an not necessarily a happily ever after type of end to this story, but like you said, there needs to be something that we go, this isn't just this ongoing tragedy generation after generation.
Yeah, there needs to be something.
Yeah. Arica, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree too. I was watching actually a video earlier today about storytelling, and I cannot remember. I think, yeah, I can't remember the channel it was from, but there was, I believe it was a film writer who was talking about how you have to find that balance between punishing your characters and giving them the opportunities to overcome that hardship. And if you lean too much into, just punishing them and like heaping all of this like horrible tragedy on them, and then it's kind of just bleak and hopeless, people check out, because we all want to see that element of hope. And there's a fine line between that hope and that despair, and you have to figure out what that balance is, so that you give them just enough that, yeah, it's sad, but then also it's enough of a motivator to get them to overcome what they're facing. And I mean, it's hard to know what they're going to do with that in terms of the Mandalorian story, because like you guys, I don't really know exactly where they're going with it. I would hope that there is some sort of triumphant end to it, at the very least, at least like somewhat, I don't know, I mean, like somewhat permanent, even if it's semi-permanent, like just let people be happy for a while. I mean, because I had that problem with the Jedi, and I'm just like, yeah, they're happy, and no, it's not happy anymore. Like,
no.
Yeah, it's hard. It's happy endings are not something like we joke a lot about happy endings not really being a thing in Star Wars in general, but let's be realistic. When you have a franchise that spans as many years as even just the Skywalker saga does, there isn't a lot of room for happily ever afters, especially for characters who are present in the big action in the middle. We've talked before about where Han and Leia's situation is in the sequel trilogy, and how it was hard when the EU really gave them a happy family life in spite of a lot of problems and a lot of tragedy. And I always get a little bit cynical when I see a lot of fans who are like, they really take the death of a certain character personally. And because part of me is like, well, I mean, did you not expect it? I mean,
right.
Especially in this era where we know that we're gonna be going into a whole nother, the sequel trilogy era, where we know there's lots more going on. It's hard to find those moments, but that's exactly why, if we can't have a happily ever after, that is why hope has to be such a pervasive theme throughout all of it, because otherwise it can get very bleak. It can feel like, what's the point of all of this? So I think that for my reflections on just kind of how bleak some of the recent content has been, I would really like to see the intentionality of hope in these shows going forward. So that's my hope. Meg, any final thoughts?
I love that Star Wars has so many different opportunities to tell so many different stories in so many different mediums. The nice thing always is that you really don't have to consume everything. Like, if there's a thing you don't want to watch or a thing you don't want to read, like, for the most part, like, you don't have to. But like you said, I really do hope that like but the more that I think about it, and as you were talking, I was thinking about this, like we have gotten a lot of stories that are just kind of sad, and like it is kind of a reflection of the times. Even like I think of the authors that are writing these things, like of course they want to tell happy stories, but like before you get to the happy part, you have to sometimes tell the sad parts. And like I really do hope that like we're getting to some happier things, and like even we can start to pick out, like even from episode to episode, like, oh, this is a really sad thing that's happening, but like, oh look, Mando got a ship, like that's happy. And like I try to remind myself of that stuff too, like even if like the episode as a whole is kind of dark, like they add bits of humor and they add these things, and like I hope that that all just comes together, and we do get some hope, because we all need that.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And on that, I mentioned in the last podcast that for me, this episode really was pure Star Wars, where it was just so much heaviness in the beginning. And then I just ended with this huge smile on my face.
Yeah.
And it was just and that really is a nice microcosm of what Star Wars exactly is supposed to be. We're going to get that tragedy and that heaviness, and especially all of this heaviness that's wrapped up in history and just everything that's been going on in literally in this culture, not only being defined by the violence from the Empire, but being defined by their own culture being so reliant on violence. But then to be able to have that hope and those moments of levity, and in this case, this episode definitely provided that at the end as well. So I think that's a great image as we're talking about the importance of hope in this franchise, and hopefully we will see more of that as we continue to get new content. So thank you all for listening, and we really appreciate your support. Since we came back, I've received some lovely messages welcoming us back and saying how much we've been missed, and those messages are very much treasured. So thank you for sticking around and listening to these conversations. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can do so on Twitter at Darksaber Light. And Meg, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Meg Dowell. Right now, I'm tweeting mostly about the Darksaber, and I'm not sorry about it. So if you're into that, I'm here, not going anywhere.
Yeah, if you were listening to this episode, what we've been talking about is basically what you're gonna get from both of us on Twitter. That plus a lot of Korkie Kryze. So
Yes,
if you're not
more
interested,
Korkie.
so if you enjoyed this episode, you will enjoy us. If you did not enjoy this episode, why are you still here? And B, you probably want to steer clear from Twitter, because we make no apologies. But as always, thank you for listening. We really appreciate you. Tune in. We should be having another episode coming out about the new episode. Gosh, already on Wednesday. It's amazing how fast this is all going. So we will see you then. So have a wonderful day, and may the force be with you.